Hello and welcome to Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host for this program, which is designed to give all of us a little more insight into the characters and personalities who are involved in government and the community, both at the state and local level, and the issues that confront us in government as well as in society. Our guest today is a gentleman who has come to us from Nevada and who is our new Chief of Police for the City of Salem, Chief Myers. Welcome to Capital Insight.
Thank you. Good to be here, Kevin.
One of the things we do on the show is we try to quickly get into the personality and background of a guest, and I'd like you to give us some idea of where you come from, where you were born, and where you got your schooling.
Okay. Well, I started out in Ohio, and my earliest recollection back there is probably when I lived on a farm. My father moved into Pittsburgh area, where he worked in a factory, and from there I went to Las Vegas to visit my grandparents, who were aging and had retired. And my grandmother, by the way, still lives there and is still aging at 87, I believe. But and then I got involved with the university there, and coincidentally met a police officer in one of my classes, and eventually developed an interest in law enforcement, applied for a position with the police there, and worked there for 24 and a half years.
Well, you look like you'd be a lot younger than that. I mean,
thank you.
You could pass for a guy who's 30. You've been in law enforcement for 24 and a half years?
Yes, I have a plaque that says 24.7. I think that's probably more accurate, but yes.
And now 7 months of that, as we speak now, is as Chief of Police in Salem?
Actually, yes. As of March, I passed my 25th year in law enforcement, and I came here in November.
Okay,
13th.
so the 24.7 plus now the 7 months in Salem.
Yes.
Well, as Chief of Police, we think of you as a man in uniform and we think of you as law enforcement, but there's more to you than that. Tell us about your family.
I have a lovely wife and 6 children. We have a daughter who's now on a mission. She's 21 years old, and 5 boys that are still at home.
And how do you handle those kinds of responsibilities when you also have to handle the Chief of Police role? How do you juggle those?
I have a very good wife, and I try, if I'm not at work, I try to be with my family, and don't have much between those 2 priorities.
Well, what compelled you to come to Salem? Why did you decide to come, or to Oregon for that matter?
Actually, it was, well, eventually I knew that I would retire. Didn't plan on retiring nearly as soon as I did, but had friends who spoke highly of law enforcement opportunities for chiefs of police, and one of them was a personnel director and suggested I should explore that area, and I did, sort of testing the waters, my wife and I, assuming that someday we might be interested in moving. And when we found out about Salem, actually I sent 2 letters, and one was to Salem. We found out about here, and I was invited up here to interview. I was very impressed with 3 things. One was it was much like Pennsylvania, green and lush and beautiful country. Second, I was very impressed with the quality of city government, the city manager, his leadership, his staff, and the police department and the officers there. And thirdly, the character of the people. I have never been around a group of people that were more friendly and more helpful than I have since I've been in Salem.
Oh, that's a real positive affirmation of the community.
It is.
Well, in terms of the community that you left, I mean, we think of Nevada as the gambling state, or as a place for us to, Reno and Las Vegas come to mind, maybe Tahoe. What kind of a change in the social environment have you noticed coming to Salem as opposed to Nevada?
Of course, my family life in Nevada away from work was primarily in suburbs, much like it is here. The work environment was considerably affected by the fact that now it's not unusual to have 200,000 tourists in there on a busy weekend, so it can be busy. They, like Salem, don't have enough police officers to handle all the work. But there's a lot of similarity. There are a lot of good people, strong economy in Las Vegas. Made a lot of good friends there, and the police department's a very professional police agency, and of course I enjoyed working there, but the pace here is much more pleasant. The growth there, they've had tremendous growth there the last few years. And I think although there is some gaming here, I think the fact that there's not as much is an advantage. I think gaming brings with it some problems.
Well, that's an issue that we're going to be addressing. It looks like on a statewide issue that there's now an Attorney General's task force that's been developed at the request of the governor to talk about gaming, which is the whole range of gambling involving a variety of activities in the state. Is this something that you'll be involved with at all, or are you going to let those statewide folks worry about those things while you focus more on getting to know your own community as chief of police?
At this point in time, I feel it's very important that I should spend just as much time as possible with the people in Salem. In fact, I was surprised when I first got here. I wanted to spend my first 30 days with the police department staff and be invisible to the outside, and I was advised that there was a demand, a need for me to spend time with the citizenry, so I thought, well, I'll spend a month doing that and then spend the rest of my time in-house. And actually, the interaction that I've had with the citizenry here has been much more intense than I'd ever expected, more than I'd experienced in Las Vegas, and very rewarding and productive. I believe we're getting a mindset of what the people want from us as a police agency, and I believe they have some pretty high expectations, and I believe with the high quality of staff we have in this department, we can meet a lot of them if we pull together as a community. But that's a full-time job, and that's where my priorities need to be, I believe, is focusing on addressing the priorities of the citizens in Salem.
And just as a side thought, it occurs to me that one of the things we could do in this process as we're trying to develop statewide responses to these issues is there are a lot of retired law enforcement folks who are not still actively engaged in law enforcement. Perhaps we ought to draw on some of their expertise in terms of trying to deal with issues such as gambling.
Good point. Very good point.
Well, shifting back to your new position, or almost new position now, and your interaction with the community, one of the things I've observed about Salem and Oregon since I came here from Virginia 22 years ago was that Oregonians are actively involved in their government, which I think is a very positive element. You've obviously already commented on that. Is that involvement something that is going to ever get in your way in terms of what you're trying to do as a chief, or so far has that served to help things along?
I look at the citizens much as, I suppose, a manager in a private organization would look at his stakeholders, his stockholders. And I believe that it's critically important that I'm in touch with what they believe is important, because that's what I should be focusing primary attention on. I think sometimes I can bring to the table with them in a dialogue and conversation information that might help them reevaluate their priorities. For example, the increase in youth violence, it's not visible unless you happen to be in certain places during the nighttime hours. So those kinds of issues we need to bring to the citizens' attention, and so that we can collectively together with them, bring our information to the table and their preferences regarding that, and follow the direction that they, as the stockholders in our agency, want us to take.
As you're dealing with these issues, of course you've got to go through some prioritization. In looking at you and looking at law enforcement officers and administrators, chiefs around the state, I've been impressed with the fact that we have a very large extensive sense of professionalism, and I've noticed that law enforcement folks take a global view of criminal justice issues. I'm just curious, from your perspective, if we look back to, say, the 1930s and the image of the police chief as a guy running around with a nightstick and a bunch of officers in blue following him, the training, the comparison of training and expertise of, say, 60 years ago with today, can you give us a comment on that?
I would venture to guess that a large number of the chiefs of police in our nation today, certainly a number of the ones in Oregon that I'm familiar with, are college graduates. Many have advanced degrees. Many have attended the FBI National Academy, which is a very progressive educational facility funded by the Department of Justice. It's 3 months long, intensive training. There are other institutions such as Police Executive Research Forum and the IACP, just to mention a few, that put on some rather lengthy and rather intense training programs, and many of us have taken advantage of those programs. And I think what we've discovered is a couple of things. First of all, in fact, leadership literature that I read not too long ago said the day of the expert man at the top of the organization that can guide the ship and always be on course is past, because you need legal advisors and personnel advisors. I mean, the environment we operate in, aside from the legal side, the social side itself is so complex that you've got to have a collective intelligence to really lead and to move forward, and that requires communication and consensus building and sharing of values and establishment of priorities with a group, not just an individual. And I think that's the kind of leadership we're finding in law enforcement, that the realization has come to law enforcement over the past couple of decades that we alone cannot cure crime problems. Crime is very intensely woven into the fabric of society. And if the individuals coming from our homes have good character, and good values, then we police differently than if we have tens of thousands of people coming from homes with a different set of values and a different kind of character than the ideal norm in society. So families, schools, churches, neighborhoods, unfortunately, things like alcohol abuse, drug abuse, violence in the media have all had some pretty significant effect on our society, and that is reflected back toward law enforcement and the way we respond to the people in that society.
On a lighter note, do people refer to you as Chief Myers? How do you prefer to be referred to?
Walt.
Okay. Just the informal side, huh?
Yes.
Well, let me mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix, your host, and our guest is Chief Walt Myers, the Salem Police Department. If you ever have any questions or concerns, feel free to write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. You can also phone my law office at 364-1913. If you do call, please mention it's a legislative matter so the staff will know how to handle it. And again, you can write to Capital Insight if you have any questions or concerns or criticisms, comments, anything of that like. We're always glad to hear from you. Turning back to Walt, it's a change. I'm always used to thinking of police and police chiefs as authoritative figures, so I want to call you Chief Myers all the time, but I'll call you Walt if I can. In terms of that sense of professionalism and interaction with the community, what is your evaluation, looking at our community now, of some of the major issues that are confronting law enforcement? And can you give us some idea how you want to try to address those issues?
Yes. You mentioned earlier the citizens of our community and the eagerness with which they embrace government and government activities and involve themselves there. I find a similar eagerness regarding volunteerism, a tremendous amount of energy amongst the citizens in our community and a willingness to commit that energy to make our community a better place to live. And that resource is over here. And here at 2 o'clock in the morning is a family in a crisis. Now, the social services and the volunteer services and all those services that would help this family, often affected children, typically what we have is an alcohol or drug abusing parent, most often a father if there's physical abuse, who's abused a mother and perhaps the children. And I use that scenario because it is it is an all too common scenario here in our community. And typically it's later in the evening. It's often late evening, after 4 or 5 in the evening, when most social service associations tend to be open. And a police officer goes there and he supplies them with information and alternatives that are distant, that are to be available tomorrow at 8 or Monday morning at 8. And oftentimes the best time to fix that crisis is to deliver those services right now. So what I would envision is, since the needs in our community probably outstrip or at least certainly tax the resources available to apply to those problems, what I would envision is that we take a section of our town where domestic violence is high, crime is high, alcohol abuse is high, fear is a factor. Oftentimes there's some socioeconomic problems there, socioeconomic deprivation, a lower standard of living. And many of the families or individuals in it feel kind of disconnected, not only from their neighborhood, but certainly from the community at large. And to go into one of those neighborhoods that has some significant needs, and to then bring these resources, the citizens that are willing to volunteer, the social services, and certainly the police, together, and prioritize the needs in that area, and focus our attentions in there to gradually build strength, to bring out the people in that section of the community that have the leadership ability and skills and motivation. I found it interesting to note in 25 years of law enforcement and I've been in some very bad neighborhoods, and the very worst neighborhoods that I've been in, by far the majority of the people living there are good people. Sometimes a small active criminal element can damage a neighborhood and cause people to go fearfully within their homes, and we need to draw them out of their homes and start building the relationships between them and the different groups and associations that would support them. Eventually you build enough strength into that neighborhood to where you move some of the resources you've applied there into another neighborhood and continue the cycle until gradually you build strength in a larger number of neighborhoods throughout our community, one by one.
Is there a way of linking up some of this volunteerism on a 24-hour basis? I'm just thinking out loud here in terms of the problem that you see, the challenge of having some resources available at all hours, of creating a positive environment for volunteerism where there's an on-call group or there's where there's an all 24-hour-a-day service center, I'll call it, a volunteer service center, where folks would know that one day a month they're going to come in as volunteers for a 4 or 8 hour shift, be there, be available. And I'm just thinking out loud, I think of the firemen, or now firefighters, who have to be available 24 hours a day, and you've got the volunteers who come in. We've adjusted for that over time, and we recognize that, but could we set up a system where we say this is the community volunteer services center, and you know, once a month I'm going to spend 8 hours there from midnight to 8 a.m. on that shift and be available to help, and then you have some resource available. What does that sort of idea sound like?
I think there are many ways to do that, and I think there's two issues. One is the global or macro, and the other is the micro. And I think if the philosophy we take, the approach is the same, that we want to match needs and resources, particularly focusing on the young and the aged that can't care for themselves as well. Maybe a better word is needy, particularly focusing on the needy. That our community-wide philosophy has to be individually, each and every one of us as leaders, as citizens, have to do something, whether it's being a Boy Scout leader or a Girl Scout leader, volunteering at the YWCA, you know, whatever it is, do something constructive. And I think that affects our community significantly. But then let's go beyond that. Let's go to that really difficult neighborhood where there is a shortage oftentimes of leadership, or the leadership's not activated, and that's on a more micro level, to decide to tailor to a particular neighborhood the solution that's going to help them with their problems. What I believe it requires is you send a police officer in there who examines it firsthand in the middle of the night as well as the middle of the day, and really begins to understand and develops relationships, one-on-one, face-to-face communication with the citizens there, and over a time gets a feel for what the needs really are by listening to the people, and combine that with scientific research, of course, social research, of course. But then he, as the line leader, will team up with, for example, if, gee, domestic violence is the big issue, then we get some social workers who focus on, who are experts in that area, get them in that neighborhood. Together they start to strategize and to plan. And eventually we get more and more players on the team, depending on what the needs in that neighborhood are. And they formulate for us the specific details as to how we'll create a healthy environment in that neighborhood, rather than do it the other way around and say, okay, policy statement, here's how we're going to do it.
Here's the program, now you fit into the program.
Exactly.
Here's the neighborhood, here are the problems. Make the program fit the neighborhood.
Exactly, because every neighborhood is different, and every neighborhood has the strength. If you can develop the leadership and bring it out, every neighborhood has tremendous strength that is usually underutilized, particularly in those neighborhoods where crime is high.
Well, what you've just been describing fits in very much with community policing, which is a term which may be misused somewhat these days. It doesn't just mean walking the beat and stopping in every store and saying, hi, how are you, but developing an actual relationship with the community. How do you feel about the state of community policing in Salem, and what are you planning to do to develop that?
I was impressed when I came here because it is a progressive agency with a progressive mindset. It's a dynamic group of people with a very strong work ethic. It was kind of like a man's dream to take over as chief of police of a department that has so many positive attributes. What we need to do now is manage this problem, this big problem, and that is tremendous volume of demands, very limited resources with which to address those demands. Hiring more police officers is the ideal way to do that. I hope that will happen someday, but I know the way our budget looks, it's not likely to happen soon. We have gotten some additional officers, and they won't finish training cycle until near January. But secondly, looking at all the work that we do and asking ourselves if it's productive, and going to our stakeholders, our stockholders, and saying, okay, here's the tens of thousands of dollars you're paying us to do work project A, and here's the outcome. And in some cases, we'll find the outcomes are not satisfactory, and I believe that people will say, well, we don't want you to do that, especially as we lay our priorities, our issues before them, and they see over here, for example, drug houses that are not getting attended to, while stolen Hershey bars are. I think they'll say, gee, let's pay attention to the drug houses. Let's give them more attention, and let's see if we can't handle the Hershey bar situation differently, still reach the same or perhaps even a better outcome with less application of costly police resources. And so that's the first issue, is get more cops, which is a long-term plan, but we'll do well with what we have. The second issue is not doing just everything that we have because we've traditionally done it. And a lot of that's already been done within the department. So there's not a whole lot more streamlining we can do, but there is some. And the third and most important issue is expanding the team that's addressing the problem. And that is where I believe we'll get the greatest payoff, the greatest amount of results.
Let me pause for a moment and mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. Our guest today is Chief Walt Myers from the Salem Police Department. I'm Representative Kevin Mannix. I'm your host for the program. If you ever have any questions or concerns or comments, please feel free to contact me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. Also, if you'd like to call, the phone number for my law firm is 364-1913. I'll mention that we are a citizen legislature, and that means most of us, most of the time, are out there in non-legislative roles. But if you do need to call me during the day, you can call me at the law firm. Just mention to the staff that it's a legislative matter, so they'll know how to handle it and direct the call to me. Turning back to you, Chief Walt, I've still got to get used to that. When I'm a representative at the Capitol, everyone always calls you representative, no matter how many times you tell them not to. And I found out later it's sort of a lobbyist protocol that they had, and because elsewhere it's always Kevin. But I guess that's just a different environment, and so I can adjust back. We were talking about community policing and obviously resource allocation, and I wondered if there's a process of empowerment that we could develop where we could empower the police with what I'll call supplemental forces. Not just police reserve, but whether or not there's senior citizen patrols that might be able to be eyes and ears, and if we could develop more protections for them in terms, I'm thinking state policy now, in terms of their potential liability if they're out there, also the potential liability of the government or the police if something happens to them. But should we be trying to find ways of allowing the police to bring in volunteers to assist in various ways, knowing that the volunteers and the police are mutually protected should something go awry? That's an open-ended question for you.
If I could mention something that's related to that before I go into that, and that is one very important thing that citizens can do. The greatest threat to the safety and well-being of you and I and all our family members at this point in time is driving down the street. There are more people injured by automobile accidents than by all the violent crime put together. So if we would all drive lawfully and carefully and courteously, it would make a tremendous difference on the demand of police resources, and it'd be like hiring a couple of extra police officers, because we can set that mode. And the second...
I interrupt you then.
You bet.
I would add then also cross streets lawfully and bicycle lawfully. I'm amazed at the number of bicyclists who go the wrong way down the street, and maybe we citizens ought to be more willing to say something to them like, you're violating the law, this is dangerous. Excuse me, go ahead.
Well, we've all been to a town where you drive down the street and you see the sign says 25, and you know that means 33, so you drive 33, and then you notice everyone else is driving 25. What do? It's a strange town, they're driving 25. You assume they have a reason, you'll slow down to 25 too. I'd like for our town to be that kind of town, to where people notice when they come to our town, the new move-ins, which are coming by thousands, and the visitors, which are coming by tens of thousands, would say, gee, people here drive the speed limit. They make a full stop at stop signs. They don't rush through yellow lights. Not only will lives be saved, and they certainly will, but also it'll be a safer place for all of us. And related to that is, you may have seen the article in the Statesman recently, that about 72% of our burglaries in the previous 5-week period, the homes had an unlocked or open door or window. If people will be more security conscious, our society's changing, our town is changing, and that would help, because that will reduce crime. Many criminals just won't, a lot of them are opportunists. The drugs are typically the driving force behind crime, criminal behavior, and profit is why they're stealing, to try and get money to buy drugs. But if we remove the opportunity by not leaving things visible in the seat of our car, or when we're parked downtown, not leaving the keys in our car. On one particular Friday, I think I told you the other day, we had 6 stolen cars. 3 of them had the keys in the ignition. If we lock the car doors, take the keys out. If we have items that need to be left in our car, and it's preferable that we take items of value with us, but if they need to be left in our car, let's put them in the trunk.
Now, I agree with all of those, and I'm interrupting you for a moment just to be a devil's advocate on that. And people will say, but isn't that giving in to the sense of criminality around us? And I think I know the contrary argument to that, but that's the argument you'll hear is, why do we have to give up this sense of leaving doors unlocked or leaving keys in cars? Of course, I'd say in urban areas now that's asking for it, but what's your response?
I think on the one hand we have ideals and idealism. On the other hand, we have reality and realism. And I tend to be an idealist because I believe in the power of the spirit of man. I think people are good. Most people are good. I spent 10 months of my life in a jail overseeing the operation and talked with a number of inmates there. I've met dozens and dozens of criminals, And even the worst criminals, I have seen some good in them. And most criminals are even more good than bad. They just have some bad things that they are doing, typically drug-related. But in any event, the reason I bring that up is because the ideal is that people won't steal. The reality is some people are so addicted to drugs that they'll murder for them. Those people are out there. The stool's got to have 3 legs or it won't stand up. Yes, prevention is good. We need to do DARE programs in the school. We need to teach children values in the home. Prevention is good. Intervention is good. Some people want to get out of that cycle of crime and drug abuse. But let us also acknowledge there's a 3rd leg on that stool. There are some people that like drugs. There are some people that like crime. Some that have deliberately chosen that course, that are violent, that are mean, that would kill you or I if they could profit by it without batting an eye. Those people are there. We can't be naive to that. We've got to manage the environment around us against a background of reality. Keep our ideals, but also be attuned to reality. There's danger in the streets of Salem. There's gunfire in the streets of Salem.
Now, I interrupted your earlier stream, and I'm glad I did because I appreciate your response on that. So where do we go in terms of this continuing enforcement mode that you were just discussing? You're talking about how citizens can help. You talked about driving more carefully, observing the laws. Pick up from that theme, though, the volunteerism and all that.
Then the point is to really analyze what they're doing. I mean, time is the stuff of life, I've heard it said. Analyze what they're doing with their time. When I read studies that say the average American watches 4 hours of TV a day, the average American home TV is on 4 hours a day, and every study I've seen shows less than 4 minutes character building interaction between the average American parent and the average American child, something is wrong with this picture. And when I hear of people leaving their children at child care center 12 hours a day when they've got an 8 or 9 hour a day job, or 7 days a week when they've got a 5-day-a-week job, I become concerned. I recognize that some people have to work. Sometimes both people in the home have to work, and if that's essential, then it is. But if it's not, I guess something that stuck with me years ago, I heard it said that no one lays on their deathbed wishing they would have spent more time at the office. And I think we should prepare now for our deathbed. It will come to us all, and spend more time doing the things that are really important. Time with our family, time with other people, building bonds and relationships, sharing values and character.
You tempt me to suggest that maybe we should have a tax meter on each television, that after 1 hour it kicks in and you have to pay a certain tax for the amount of time that the TV is on. And it's only a half whimsical thought in the sense that the amount of time that your TV is on in your home, in terms of broadcast TV at least, is probably somewhat proportional to the amount of problems we now have in society from lack of attention to our kids or from what the kids happen to see on television. But I realize I'm getting far afield here, and it's just a whimsical thought, but it tempts me to, nevertheless.
Well, and related to your thought, the experts say that the primary cause of the wave of youth violence that's running across our nation today and has touched our home, has touched our town, is caused by a couple of primary factors. Number one, they claim, is the breakdown in values. People want stuff that a gun can get them, for example, material things, more than they want relationships, more than they care about other people and other people's feelings. They care about acquiring stuff, material goods. But that breakdown in values, which they tie closely to the breakdown in family, ties in just what you were talking about. And a second primary factor is the viewing of violence. There are literally over 200 studies, I believe 255 was in the Salt Lake Tribune article I saw was the number, scientific studies that show a correlation between acting out of violence and viewing of violence.
Well, I'm going to have to interrupt you with that heavy thought and mention to our audience that at least you've spent the last 30 minutes not viewing violence, and we hope developing a little more insight into our community. Chief Walt Myers, I very much appreciate your being with us today, and thank you to our audience for being with us. Obviously, we could have gone on with this, and perhaps in future sessions we can talk some more with the Chief about what's happening in Salem and law enforcement. Thank you for joining us on Capital Insight.